I watched from my front porch as my two kids, 7-year-old Mason and 5-year-old Sophie, giggled while drawing colorful flowers and butterflies on our driveway with sidewalk chalk. It was a perfect Saturday morning in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, the kind of day that made me grateful we'd moved to the Saguaro Ridge community just 6 months ago. The sun was warm but not scorching yet, and my wife Jennifer was inside making lunch while I kept an eye on the kids. Everything felt peaceful, until I saw Deborah Patterson marching down the sidewalk with the kind of purposeful stride that screamed trouble. Deborah was the vice president of our homeowners association, a 52-year-old woman with a blonde bob haircut that never moved and an expression that looked like she'd been sucking on lemons for the past decade. She wore her typical weekend uniform of pressed khaki capris and a tucked-in polo shirt, her HOA badge dangling from a lanyard around her neck like some kind of suburban sheriff. I'd only had a few interactions with her since we'd moved in, but each one had left me with the distinct impression that she considered herself the guardian of property values and community standards. "Excuse me," Deborah's voice cut through the morning air before she'd even reached our property line. "Excuse me, are you the parent of these children?" I stood up from my chair, already sensing where this was going. "Yes, I'm Aaron Emerson. These are my kids. Is there a problem?" She stopped at the edge of our driveway, her hands planted firmly on her hips as she stared down at Mason and Sophie, who had paused their artwork to look up at her with wide, confused eyes. "A problem? Yes, there is absolutely a problem. This is completely unacceptable." I walked down the porch steps, positioning myself between Deborah and my children. "What's unacceptable? They're drawing with chalk on our own driveway." "It's an eyesore," Deborah snapped, waving her hand dismissively at the colorful drawings. "This is a respectable neighborhood and we have standards. The HOA covenant clearly states that residents must maintain the aesthetic appearance of their properties. This," she gestured again at the chalk art, "is vandalism." I felt my jaw tighten. "It's washable sidewalk chalk on my driveway. It'll be gone with the first rain or when I hose it down." "That's not the point." Deborah's voice rose, and I noticed a few neighbors starting to peek out of their windows. "The point is that while it's there, it looks trashy and brings down the entire neighborhood's appearance." "I've received multiple complaints." That was a lie. I could tell by the way her eyes flickered to the side. We were on a cul-de-sac with only 6 houses, and I'd become friendly with most of our neighbors. None of them would have complained about kids drawing with chalk. "Daddy." Sophie's small voice came from behind me. "Are we in trouble?" Before I could respond, Deborah pointed a finger at Sophie. "Yes, young lady, you are in trouble. What you're doing is against the rules, and if you don't clean this up immediately, your parents are going to receive a fine." "Don't talk to my daughter like that," I said firmly, keeping my voice level but making sure she understood I was serious. "If you have an issue, you discuss it with me, not my 5-year-old. Deborah's face flushed red. "I will speak to whomever I need to speak to. These children need to learn that there are rules in this world, and actions have consequences. This neighborhood has standards, Mr. Emerson, and if you and your family can't abide by them, perhaps you should have purchased a home somewhere else." Mason had started to cry quietly, and Sophie was clutching her chalk so tightly her knuckles had turned white. I could feel my anger building, but I forced myself to stay calm. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened the camera app, and hit record. "What are you doing?" Deborah demanded. "I'm recording this conversation," I said clearly, "for documentation purposes. Now, can you please cite the specific section of the HOA covenant that prohibits children from drawing with washable chalk on their own driveway?" Her eyes narrowed. "You can't record me without my permission." Arizona is a one-party consent state, I replied, keeping the phone steady and aimed at her. I only need my own consent to record this conversation. Now, about that covenant section. Deborah's mouth opened and closed a few times as she searched for words. Section 3, subsection B, paragraph 2 states that no alterations to the exterior appearance of properties are permitted without HOA approval. That refers to permanent alterations like paint colors, additions, and landscaping changes, I said. Not temporary chalk drawings that wash away with water. Would you also fine me for having my kids' bikes on the driveway, or maybe their basketball hoop? Don't get smart with me, Deborah snarled, stepping closer to me. I could see small flecks of spittle at the corners of her mouth as she worked herself up. I am a member of the HOA board, and I have the authority to issue citations for violations. This is a violation, and you will receive a fine of $250 if this isn't cleaned up within the next 2 hours. $250 for chalk. I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. That's the standard fine for aesthetic violations, she said with a smug expression. And if you don't pay it within 30 days, it increases by $50 per week, and we can place a lien on your property. My kids were now both crying behind me, and I heard the front door open as Jennifer came out to see what was happening. Aaron, what's going on? This is Mrs. Patterson from the HOA, I said, still recording. She's threatening to fine us because the kids are drawing with chalk. Jennifer, who normally had the patience of a saint, looked at Deborah with an expression of pure confusion. You're joking, right? Do I look like I'm joking? Deborah turned her attention to Jennifer. Maybe if you were actually supervising your children instead of leaving them to destroy neighborhood property, we wouldn't be having this conversation. They're on our property, Jennifer said slowly, as if explaining something to a particularly dense child. Our driveway, our house, our property line. It's visible from the street, which makes it the HOA's concern, Deborah shot back. Everything visible from public areas falls under our jurisdiction for aesthetic standards. That's what you agreed to when you signed your purchase documents. I was still recording every word. Deborah pointed her finger at Jennifer now, her voice getting louder and more shrill. You know what your problem is. You're one of those permissive parents who let their children run wild with no discipline. These kids need to learn respect for rules and authority, and clearly they're not learning it at home. Okay, that's enough, I said, moving to stand directly in front of the camera's view. You've made your position clear. You believe this is a violation. We disagree. We'll take it up with the full HOA board. I am the HOA board, Deborah insisted. My word is final. You're the vice president, I corrected. There's a president, a treasurer, a secretary, and 2 other board members. I've read the bylaws. Any fines over $100 require a vote by the full board. Deborah's face had gone from red to almost purple. You want to play lawyer? Fine. You'll get your hearing and you'll lose, and then you'll pay the fine plus administrative fees for wasting everyone's time. And let me tell you something else, Mr. Emerson. I've been in this neighborhood for 15 years. I've served on the HOA board for 12 of those years. I know every single rule in that covenant, and I know how to make life very difficult for residents who don't respect our community standards. Is that a threat? I asked, making sure my phone captured her response. It's a promise, she said coldly. Clean up this mess, control your children, and maybe, just maybe, we can all coexist peacefully. Otherwise, you're going to find that every single aspect of your property will be under scrutiny. That fence in your backyard, I'll measure it to make sure it's the exact height specified. Those rose bushes Jennifer planted last month, I'll verify they're on the approved plant list. The color of your front door. I'll double-check it against the acceptable color palette. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understand that you're abusing your position to harass a family because kids were drawing with chalk, I said evenly. And I have it all on video. Deborah leaned in close to the camera, her face filling the frame. You do whatever you want with that video. No one is going to care. The board will back me up because we all agree that standards must be maintained. Now clean up this driveway before I come back in 2 hours, or you'll be sorry. She spun on her heel and marched back down the sidewalk, leaving us standing there in shock. Sophie was sobbing openly now, and Mason had buried his face against Jennifer's leg. I stopped the recording and knelt down to pull both kids into a hug. It's okay, I told them softly. You didn't do anything wrong. Mrs. Patterson is just being mean, but Daddy's going to fix this, okay? Are we going to have to pay money? Mason asked through his tears. I don't want you to have to pay money because of me. No, buddy, we're not going to pay anything, I assured him. Because you didn't break any rules. What you were doing is perfectly fine, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. Jennifer helped me get the kids inside and settled them down with some cartoons and snacks while I reviewed the video on my phone. Watching it back, I was struck by just how aggressive and unreasonable Deborah had been. She'd threatened my children, insulted our parenting, abused her authority, and made it crystal clear that she intended to retaliate against us if we didn't comply. What are we going to do? Jennifer asked, sitting down next to me on the couch. First, I'm going to document everything, I said, opening my laptop. I'm going to write down exactly what happened with timestamps. Then I'm going to read through our HOA bylaws and covenant again, very carefully. And then I'm going to request a formal hearing with the entire board. Do you think they'll side with us? I shook my head. I honestly don't know. Deborah seemed pretty confident that they'd back her up, but we have the law on our side and we have this video. If nothing else, other board members need to see how she's treating homeowners. I spent the rest of that Saturday afternoon buried in HOA documents. Our community covenant was 63 pages long, filled with provisions about everything from acceptable house colors to the types of outdoor lighting permitted. I read through every single section dealing with aesthetic standards and exterior appearance regulations. Nowhere did it mention sidewalk chalk, temporary decorations, or children's activities. The only relevant section was the one Deborah had cited, and it specifically referred to permanent alterations requiring architectural approval. I also reviewed the bylaws governing how the HOA board operated. Any fine over $100 did indeed require a vote by the majority of the board. Individual board members could issue warnings or citations, but the actual penalty had to be approved collectively. More importantly, homeowners had the right to appeal any decision to the full board within 15 days of receiving written notice of a violation. That evening, I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board. I described the incident in detail, attached the video file, and requested a hearing to dispute the threatened fine. I cited the specific sections of the bylaws that I believed were being misapplied, and I noted that Arizona state law regarding HOAs limited their authority to regulate temporary, non-permanent activities on private property. I kept my tone professional and factual, avoiding any emotional language or personal attacks on Deborah, even though I wanted to tell them exactly what I thought of her behavior. Monday morning, I printed out several copies of the letter, burned the video to a DVD for redundancy, and emailed everything to the HOA board's official address. I also sent individual copies to each board member whose contact information was listed on the community website. I wanted to make absolutely sure that everyone saw the video before any hearing took place. The response came faster than I expected. Tuesday afternoon, I received an email from Patricia Chen, the HOA president. She was a 60-year-old retired teacher who lived at the far end of our development. Her email was brief but encouraging. Mr. Emerson, I received your letter and reviewed the attached video. I've called an emergency board meeting for Thursday evening at 7 o'clock at the community clubhouse. All board members will be present, and you'll have the opportunity to present your case. I want you to know that the behavior displayed in your video does not represent the values of our community or our HOA board. We'll see you Thursday. Jennifer and I spent Wednesday evening preparing for the meeting. I made notes about the specific covenant sections, printed out copies of relevant Arizona HOA statutes, and prepared a brief statement explaining why the threatened fine was unjustified. Jennifer suggested we also bring photos of other driveways in the neighborhood that had chalk drawings, bikes, toys, and other items visible from the street that had never resulted in citations. Thursday morning, we spent an hour driving around Saguaro Ridge taking pictures. It turned out that at least a dozen homes had children's chalk art visible on driveways or sidewalks. We also documented basketball hoops, skateboards, scooters, decorative garden flags, and various other items that could arguably fall under exterior appearance if someone wanted to be unreasonably strict about enforcement. The community clubhouse was a modest single-story building near the neighborhood entrance, with a large multipurpose room, a small kitchen, and a couple of offices. When Jennifer and I arrived at 6:55, we found about 30 other residents already there, filling up most of the folding chairs that had been set out. Apparently, word had gotten around about what happened. Our neighbor from across the street, Mike Rodriguez, waved us over to a pair of seats he'd saved. "Hey, Aaron, Jennifer. Half the neighborhood is here to support you. Deborah's been driving people crazy for years, but no one's ever really challenged her before." "I didn't realize it was that bad," I said, looking around at all the familiar faces. "Oh yeah," Mike's wife Sarah chimed in. "Last year she tried to fine us because our Christmas lights were the wrong shade of white. She said they had to be pure white, not warm white. Can you believe that?" We ended up taking them down just to avoid the hassle. Before I could respond, the 5 board members entered through a side door and took their seats at a long table at the front of the room. Patricia Chen sat in the middle, with Deborah Patterson to her right. The other 3 members were Robert Walsh, the treasurer, who owned a plumbing business; Grace Sullivan, the secretary, a stay-at-home mom in her 40s; and Tom Bradley, an electrician who'd lived in the community since it was first built 20 years ago. Patricia called the meeting to order and began with standard HOA business, approving the minutes from the last meeting and reviewing the monthly financial report. Then she looked directly at me. "We have a special matter to address this evening," Patricia said, her voice carrying easily through the room. "Aaron Emerson has filed an appeal regarding a threatened fine issued by Vice President Patterson. Mr. Emerson, would you like to present your case?" I stood up, my prepared notes in hand, and walked to the front of the room. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I focused on the board members. "Thank you for hearing me out. On Saturday morning, my children were drawing with washable sidewalk chalk on our driveway. Vice President Patterson approached our property and informed me that this was a violation of HOA standards. She threatened a $250 fine if we didn't remove the chalk within 2 hours. I paused and pulled out my phone. I recorded the interaction, and with your permission, I'd like to play that video for the board and everyone present. Patricia nodded. Please proceed. I connected my phone to the projector system that the clubhouse used for presentations, and the video began playing on the wall screen. The room fell completely silent as everyone watched Deborah's aggressive confrontation with my family. I saw several board members' expressions change from neutral to concerned as they watched her threaten my children, insult our parenting, and promise to retaliate against us with excessive scrutiny of our property. When the video ended, the silence stretched for several long seconds. Finally, Patricia spoke. "Mrs. Patterson, do you dispute that this video accurately represents the interaction?" Deborah's face was tight, but she kept her composure. "The video is accurate, but it's missing context." I'd been receiving complaints from neighbors about the chalk drawings, and I was simply enforcing our community standards as I'm obligated to do as a board member. "What neighbors?" Tom Bradley asked, leaning forward. "Can you provide names?" "That information is confidential," Deborah replied smoothly. "Residents have the right to file anonymous complaints." "The bylaws don't provide for anonymous complaints," Robert Walsh said, flipping through a binder in front of him. "All complaints must be filed in writing with the complainant's name and address for record-keeping purposes." Deborah shifted in her seat. "Well, these were verbal complaints, informal in nature. From whom?" Patricia pressed. "I don't recall exactly," Deborah said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "I received dozens of comments from residents throughout the week. The important thing is that a violation was occurring and I addressed it." I raised my hand. "May I continue with my presentation?" Patricia nodded, and I distributed the photographs Jennifer and I had taken, along with copies of the relevant covenant sections and state statutes. "As you can see from these photos, numerous homes in our community have similar or identical items visible from the street. Chalk drawings, sports equipment, toys, decorations. None of these homes have received citations. The covenant section Mrs. Patterson cited refers specifically to permanent alterations requiring architectural approval. Temporary, washable chalk is not a permanent alteration by any reasonable interpretation." Grace Sullivan was studying the photos carefully. "These were all taken in our neighborhood yesterday morning," I confirmed. "I can provide the addresses if needed." Additionally, Arizona state law limits HOA authority over temporary, non-destructive activities on private property. There's established case precedent that supports a homeowner's right to allow their children to engage in normal childhood activities like sidewalk chalk without HOA interference. I'd done my homework, and I could see it was making an impact. Robert Walsh was nodding along as I spoke, and Tom Bradley was making notes on a legal pad. "Furthermore," I continued, "the manner in which this violation was communicated is itself a violation of our bylaws." Section 7, subsection C states that board members must conduct themselves professionally and courteously in all interactions with residents. As you saw in the video, Mrs. Patterson threatened my children directly, insulted my wife and me as parents, and promised retaliatory enforcement actions if we didn't comply with her demands. That's not professional or courteous. Deborah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I have served this community faithfully for 12 years. I have dedicated countless hours to maintaining our property values and ensuring our neighborhood remains a desirable place to live. I will not sit here and be lectured about professionalism by someone who's been here for 6 months and thinks the rules don't apply to him." "The rules do apply to me," I said calmly, "but they have to be enforced fairly and consistently, and they have to actually exist in writing. There is no rule against sidewalk chalk. You made a judgment call based on your personal opinion, and when I questioned it, you became aggressive and threatening, That's an abuse of your authority. Patricia held up her hand. Everyone please calm down. Mr. Emerson, do you have anything else to add? Just one thing, I said. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking that the rules be applied as they're written, fairly and consistently to all residents. If the board decides that sidewalk chalk should be prohibited, that's your right, but it needs to go through the proper process of amending the covenant with homeowner input and a vote. It can't be enforced retroactively based on one board member's personal preferences. I sat back down and Jennifer squeezed my hand supportively. Patricia looked at her fellow board members. Does anyone else have questions for Mr. Emerson or comments about this matter? Tom Bradley cleared his throat. I've got something to say. I've lived here since the beginning, and I've seen a lot of board members come and go. The whole point of our HOA is to protect property values by preventing things that actually damage the neighborhood. You know, making sure people don't paint their houses neon pink or leave broken-down cars in their yards. It's not about hassling families because kids are drawing on their own driveway. That's ridiculous. Grace Sullivan nodded. I agree. I have grandchildren who visit regularly, and they love drawing with chalk when they're here. I had no idea this was even considered an issue. Robert Walsh tapped his pen against his notepad. Beyond the specific chalk question, I'm more concerned about the conduct we saw in that video. Deborah, I've worked with you for years, and I respect your dedication, but the way you spoke to the Emersons and their children was way out of line. We represent the community, and we need to treat residents with respect. Deborah's jaw clenched. So what? We're just going to let people do whatever they want. Let the neighborhood turn into a free-for-all. Property values matter and standards matter. If we don't enforce them strictly, everything falls apart. There's a difference between strict enforcement and harassment, Patricia said quietly. I've reviewed the covenant thoroughly since receiving Mr. Emerson's letter, and I agree with his interpretation. The section you cited doesn't apply to temporary chalk drawings. There's no valid basis for the fine you threatened. So you're siding with him over me, Deborah's voice rose. After everything I've done for this community. We're not siding with anyone, Patricia said firmly. We're applying the rules as they're written. That's our job. Now, I'm going to call for a vote. All in favor of dismissing the violation notice and threatened fine against the Emerson family, please say aye. 4 voices said aye in unison. Everyone except Deborah. All opposed, nay, Deborah said bitterly. The motion passes 4-1, Patricia announced. The violation is dismissed. Mr. Emerson, your children are welcome to draw with chalk on your driveway without fear of penalty. A small round of applause broke out from the residents in attendance. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but Patricia wasn't finished. Now we need to address the conduct issue, she said, looking directly at Deborah. The video shows behavior that violates our board conduct standards. Mrs. Patterson, I'm formally reprimanding you for your unprofessional treatment of the Emerson family. Deborah's face went pale. A reprimand? You're putting that in my record over this. It's warranted, Tom Bradley said. If any employee spoke to customers the way you spoke to the Emersons, they'd be fired. We're volunteers, but we still need to maintain standards. I'd like to make a motion, Robert Walsh said. I move that the board issue a formal written apology to the Emerson family for the treatment they received, to be read at our next regular meeting and posted on the community website. Grace Sullivan seconded the motion immediately, and it passed 4-1 again, with only Deborah voting against it. The meeting continued with other routine business, but I barely paid attention. I was still processing what had just happened. We'd won, completely and decisively. The board had not only dismissed the ridiculous fine, but had also held Deborah accountable for her behavior. After the meeting adjourned, several neighbors came up to congratulate us and thank us for standing up to Deborah. Mike Rodriguez clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good, man. Maybe now she'll think twice before going after people for stupid stuff." But as we were leaving, I noticed Deborah standing by her car in the parking lot, talking intensely on her phone. She looked furious, and when she caught me watching, the look she gave me was pure venom. Jennifer noticed it too. "You think this is really over?" she asked as we drove home. "I hope so," I said, but I had a nagging feeling that it wasn't. The formal apology was scheduled to be read at the next regular monthly meeting, which was 3 weeks away. In the meantime, I made sure to document everything. I kept copies of all emails, recorded the board meeting minutes when they were posted online, and maintained a file with all the relevant documents. 2 weeks after the emergency meeting, I came home from work to find a certified letter in our mailbox. It was from the HOA, and my stomach dropped as I opened it. Inside was a notice of violation, this time citing our backyard fence for being 3 inches over the maximum allowed height, and our rose bushes for not being on the approved landscaping list. I measured the fence myself with a tape measure. It was exactly the permitted height of 6 feet, not an inch over. I then checked the approved plant list, which was part of the covenant appendix, and found roses explicitly listed under acceptable flowering plants. Deborah was retaliating, exactly as she'd threatened. I photographed the fence with the tape measure clearly showing the height, printed out the page from the covenant showing roses on the approved list, and sent another letter to the board documenting this new harassment. Patricia Chen called me the next day. "Mr. Emerson, I received your letter and I want to apologize. These violations are completely unfounded and I've personally reviewed them and dismissed them. I've also had a very serious conversation with Mrs. Patterson about retaliation. This behavior is unacceptable." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I'm concerned about what happens next." She made it clear in the video that she planned to scrutinize every aspect of our property, and that's exactly what she's doing. Patricia sighed heavily. "Between you and me, there have been concerns about Deborah's approach for some time now. You're not the first resident to complain, but you're the first one to push back formally and document everything. The rest of the board and I are discussing our options." "What kind of options?" "I can't get into specifics right now, but let's just say we're reviewing whether she should continue in her current role. In the meantime, if she contacts you again for any reason, please document it and let me know immediately." The next regular HOA meeting arrived on a Wednesday evening. The community clubhouse was packed again, with even more residents than last time. Word had apparently spread about the apology, and people wanted to witness it. Jennifer and I arrived early and sat in the front row. Deborah was already seated at the board table, her expression stony. She didn't look at me or acknowledge my presence at all. When the meeting started, Patricia went through the standard opening business before addressing what everyone was waiting for. "Before we proceed with tonight's agenda, the board has a matter to address from our emergency meeting 3 weeks ago," Patricia began. She glanced down at a prepared statement. "On behalf of the Saguaro Ridge HOA Board of Directors, I want to issue a formal apology to Aaron and Jennifer Emerson and their children. During an interaction on Saturday, May 14th, our vice president responded inappropriately to a situation involving the Emerson children drawing with sidewalk chalk on their driveway. The manner in which the situation was handled did not reflect the values of our community or meet the professional standards we expect from board members. The Emersons were threatened with an unjustified fine, and their children were spoken to in a way that was unnecessary and distressing. We sincerely apologize for this treatment and want to assure all residents that we are committed to enforcing our covenant fairly, consistently, and respectfully. She looked up from the paper. Mrs. Patterson, as the board member involved in this incident, we're asking you to add your personal apology to the families in attendance tonight. The room was completely silent. Every eye turned to Deborah, who sat frozen in her chair, her face flushed. For a long moment, I didn't think she was going to do it. Then, slowly, she stood up. "I apologize for the distress my words caused," she said stiffly, not looking at me or Jennifer. "It was not my intention to upset anyone. I was attempting to enforce what I believe to be community standards." "That's not really an apology," someone called out from the back of the room. "You're just saying you're sorry people got upset." Deborah's hands clenched into fists on the table. Patricia leaned over and whispered something to her. Deborah's jaw worked for a moment, and then she spoke again. "I apologize for the way I spoke to the Emerson family and their children. My behavior was unprofessional and inappropriate. I'm sorry." The words came out like she was spitting out broken glass, each one seeming to cause her physical pain. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Patricia said. "You may sit down. Now, I want to take this opportunity to remind all residents that our HOA exists to serve the community, not to create conflict or make anyone feel unwelcome in their own homes. If you ever feel that you've been treated unfairly, or that rules are being applied inconsistently, please don't hesitate to bring it to the attention of the full board." The meeting continued with regular business discussing the upcoming pool opening for summer, a proposal to repaint the community entrance sign, and approval of the annual budget. When it finally adjourned, several residents approached Jennifer and me to express their support. An older woman named Carol Thompson, who lived a few streets over, grabbed my arm gently. "I'm so glad you stood up to her. My husband and I wanted to put in a small vegetable garden in our backyard a couple years ago, and Deborah told us it wasn't allowed. We checked the covenant, and there was nothing prohibiting it, but we were too intimidated to fight her. We just gave up on the idea. I wish we'd had your courage." That conversation was repeated several times throughout the evening. Story after story of Deborah interpreting rules in the strictest possible way, or sometimes just making up rules that didn't exist, and residents being too tired or intimidated to challenge her. As we were leaving, I saw Deborah standing alone by her car again. This time, she was crying. Part of me felt bad for her, honestly. It couldn't be easy to be publicly called out and forced to apologize in front of the entire community. But then, I remembered the look on my kids' faces when she'd yelled at them, and my sympathy evaporated. Life settled back into a normal routine after that. Mason and Sophie drew with chalk on the driveway regularly, and I made sure to be outside with them every time, just in case. But Deborah seemed to be keeping her distance. I'd see her occasionally driving through the neighborhood in her white sedan, but she never stopped at our house or approached us. About 2 months after the public apology, I received an email from Patricia Chen asking if I'd be willing to attend a special board meeting. She didn't provide many details, just said it was important and that my presence would be helpful. Curious, I agreed. The meeting was held on a Saturday morning at the clubhouse, just the 5 board members and me. Patricia got straight to the point. "Aaron, I wanted to update you on some board decisions. After the incidents involving your family and additional complaints we've received from other residents, we've been conducting a comprehensive review of Mrs. Patterson's conduct as a board member. We've discovered a pattern of behavior that goes beyond overzealous enforcement. She's been issuing citations without board approval, threatening fines that don't exist in our fee schedule, and in several cases, collecting money directly from homeowners for violations that were never properly documented. My eyes widened. She's been collecting money. How does that work? Robert Walsh pulled out a folder full of documents. We started digging into the financial records after your case made us look more carefully at her activities. Several residents have written checks directly to Deborah for fines, and that money never made it into the HOA accounts. We're talking about thousands of dollars over the past few years. That's embezzlement, I said slowly. Yes, it is, Patricia confirmed grimly. We've documented at least 15 instances where she collected fines that were either unauthorized or completely fictitious. We've also found evidence that she's been using her position to retaliate against residents who have disagreed with her on other matters. Tom Bradley leaned forward. Here's why we asked you here. We're removing Deborah from the board, effective immediately. We're also filing a complaint with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office regarding the financial irregularities. Your video and documentation were crucial in establishing the pattern of abuse of authority. We wanted to thank you personally for having the courage to push back and create a record of what was happening. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. What happens to the people who paid her directly? We're contacting everyone we can identify and offering full refunds from HOA funds, Grace Sullivan said. It's the right thing to do, even though technically those payments were made to her personally, not to the HOA. We're also implementing new financial controls to make sure this can never happen again. All fines have to be approved by board vote and documented in meeting minutes, and all payments must go through our management company. When does this become public? I asked. We're sending a letter to all residents next week, Patricia said. We want to be transparent about what happened and what we're doing to fix it. We're also opening nominations early for a new vice president. Actually, Aaron, would you be interested in the position? I laughed and held up my hands. I appreciate the offer, but no thank you. I've got enough on my plate with work and the kids. I'm happy to help out where I can, but I don't have time for a board position. Fair enough, Patricia said with a smile, but if you change your mind, the offer stands. We need more people like you willing to stand up for what's right. The letter went out the following Tuesday, and the neighborhood erupted in gossip and speculation. The community Facebook page, which I'd mostly ignored until then, was flooded with comments. Some people were shocked and angry about Deborah's behavior. Others defended her, saying she'd been doing her best to maintain the neighborhood and that mistakes happen. A few people suggested I was somehow responsible for causing trouble by recording her in the first place. One comment in particular caught my attention, from a woman named Linda Harris who lived a few streets away from us. Before everyone rushes to judgment, maybe consider that Deborah Patterson has volunteered hundreds of hours of her time to this community with no compensation. She made some errors in judgment, but she doesn't deserve to have her reputation destroyed. Aaron Emerson could have handled this privately instead of publicly humiliating her. I typed out a response and then deleted it, then typed another one and deleted that too. Finally, Jennifer, who was reading over my shoulder, said, "Just leave it. You don't owe anyone an explanation." But I felt like I did. I settled on a brief, factual response. I attempted to handle this privately by requesting a board hearing, which is the proper process outlined in our bylaws. The public apology was decided by the board, not by me. As for the financial issues, those were discovered during the board's internal review and have nothing to do with my actions. The truth was, I did feel somewhat responsible for what happened to Deborah, even though logically I knew I'd just been defending my family. She'd created this situation through her own choices, but I'd been the catalyst that brought it all to light. It was a weird feeling, being simultaneously vindicated and guilty. 3 weeks later, I was pulling into my driveway after work when I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. As I got out of my truck, the car door opened and Deborah Patterson stepped out. My first instinct was to reach for my phone, but she held up her hands in a gesture of peace. "Please," she said, her voice quiet. "I just want to talk for a minute. I'm not here to cause trouble." I stayed next to my truck, keeping distance between us. "What do you want, Deborah?" She looked terrible. Her hair wasn't styled with its usual precision, her clothes were rumpled, and she had dark circles under her eyes. I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not the forced one at the meeting. You were right about everything. The chalk wasn't a violation. I shouldn't have threatened your children. I shouldn't have tried to retaliate against you. And I definitely shouldn't have been collecting money without proper documentation. I didn't say anything, just waited for her to continue. "I know this sounds like an excuse, but I want you to understand why it happened," she went on, her voice breaking slightly. "When my husband left me 8 years ago, I threw myself into HOA work because it gave me a sense of purpose and control. My kids were grown and living in other states. I'd quit my job to be a stay-at-home mom years before, and suddenly I had nothing. The HOA became my identity. Being important to the neighborhood, being the person who kept everything running smoothly, it made me feel valuable." She wiped at her eyes. "But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about serving the community and became about having power. I liked being able to tell people what to do. I liked feeling superior, like I was the only one who really understood what the neighborhood needed. And when people challenged me, I took it personally. I saw it as disrespect instead of legitimate disagreement. That doesn't excuse what you did," I said carefully. "I know it doesn't. I'm not asking for forgiveness or for you to drop anything. The county attorney is investigating, and I'll face whatever consequences come from that. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong, and I'm genuinely sorry. Your kids didn't deserve to be scared. You and your wife didn't deserve to be treated like bad parents. And all those other residents didn't deserve to be bullied and scammed." I studied her for a long moment. She seemed sincere, broken even, but I also remembered the angry, aggressive woman from that Saturday morning. "Why did you collect money directly instead of through the HOA?" "That's the part I really don't understand." She laughed bitterly. "Because about half of those fines never would have been approved by the full board if I'd submitted them for a vote. I knew that, but I was so convinced I was right that I just did it anyway. I told myself I was protecting property values, but really, I was just feeding my ego and getting a little extra money on the side. It started with one $50 fine 3 years ago, and it snowballed from there." "How much did you take?" "Just over $8,000, she said quietly. "The HOA is suing me for restitution, and they'll probably get it. I'm going to have to sell my house to pay them back, plus legal fees. I'll be moving in with my sister in Tucson in a couple of months." Part of me felt vindicated hearing that she was facing real consequences. But another part of me, the part that had been raised to be empathetic, just felt sad. She destroyed her own life through her choices, and while she deserved accountability, it was still a tragedy in its own way. "I hope you figure things out," I said finally. "And I hope you get help because it sounds like you need it," she nodded. "I'm seeing a therapist, actually. It's been helpful. Anyway, I won't take up any more of your time. I just needed to say this to your face, not through a lawyer or in a letter. I'm truly sorry." She got back in her car and drove away. I stood there in my driveway for a few minutes, processing the conversation. When I went inside, Jennifer immediately asked what had happened, and I filled her in. "You believe her?" she asked. "Yeah, I think I do," I said. "I think she genuinely regrets what happened, even if she didn't understand how wrong it was until she faced consequences. But that doesn't change the fact that she did it, and other people need to be protected from that behavior." The Maricopa County Attorney's Office moved slowly, as government agencies tend to do. But by late August, we heard that Deborah had been charged with multiple counts of theft by fraud. The HOA board kept residents updated through regular letters, and eventually, Deborah entered a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to 5 counts, received 2 years of probation, was ordered to pay full restitution of $8,300 to the HOA, and had to complete 200 hours of community service. She avoided jail time, which seemed fair to me. She'd been wrong. She'd broken the law, but she wasn't a violent criminal or a danger to anyone. She needed consequences and accountability, which she got, but prison seemed excessive for what was essentially white-collar crime at a small scale. The HOA held elections for a new vice president, and a retired accountant named Helen Morrison won the position. She immediately implemented the new financial controls that the board had discussed, including quarterly audits and requiring 2 board members to sign off on any fine over $50. Patricia Chen also spearheaded an effort to revise and simplify the covenant. They formed a resident committee to review every single rule and determine which ones actually protected property values, and which ones were just arbitrary restrictions left over from when the development was first built. The process took 6 months, but the result was a much more reasonable set of guidelines that focused on preventing genuine nuisances while allowing residents more freedom in how they used and enjoyed their properties. One of the first changes was an explicit provision allowing children's chalk art, outdoor play equipment, and other temporary items related to normal family activities. The committee also added language requiring board members to consider the intent and spirit of rules, not just the strictest possible interpretation. As for my family, life went back to normal. Mason and Sophie continued to draw on the driveway regularly, and other kids in the neighborhood joined them sometimes. It became a common sight on weekend mornings to see groups of children creating elaborate chalk murals on the cul-de-sac, with parents watching and chatting. About a year after everything started, I was outside with the kids on a Saturday morning when a moving truck pulled up to Deborah's house. I watched from a distance as movers loaded furniture and boxes. Deborah emerged from the house one last time, took a long look around the neighborhood, and then got into her car and drove away. "Daddy, who was that?" Sophie asked, looking up from her chalk drawing of a rainbow. "Just a neighbor who's moving away, sweetie," I said. "Oh, okay." She went back to her drawing, having already forgotten the question. I thought about that day almost a year ago when Deborah had confronted us, and how much had changed since then. My simple decision to record that interaction had led to uncovering financial crimes, reforming HOA governance, and ultimately pushing someone out of the neighborhood entirely. It felt like a massive butterfly effect from one small action. That evening, Patricia Chen sent an email to all residents announcing that Deborah's house had been sold and welcoming the new owners, a young couple with twins. She also reflected on the past year and the changes the community had gone through. "The events of this past year have been challenging for our community," she wrote. "We discovered problems in our governance that should have been caught much earlier, but I'm proud of how we've responded. We've implemented real reforms, updated our covenant to better reflect our values, and reaffirmed our commitment to being a community that welcomes families and treats all residents with respect. Special thanks to those residents who had the courage to speak up when they saw something wrong, particularly the Emerson family. Your willingness to stand up for what was right made all of this possible. Jennifer read the email over my shoulder. "How do you feel about all this?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. Honestly, I feel grateful that we live somewhere where the system actually worked. We had a legitimate grievance, we followed the proper process, and the right outcome happened. It took time and effort, but justice was done. That's not something everyone gets to say. "Do you regret recording her?" "Not for a second," I said firmly. Without that video, it would have been her word against mine, and given her position and history in the community, the board might have sided with her. The video provided objective evidence that couldn't be disputed or rationalized away. It protected us and ultimately protected other residents too. "Do you feel bad about what happened to her?" "I feel bad that her life fell apart, but I don't feel responsible for it," I said. She made choices, bad choices over a long period of time. I didn't make those choices for her. I just stood up for my family and refused to be bullied. The consequences she faced came from her own actions, not from mine. A few months later, around the holidays, I received a card in the mail with an Arizona postmark, but no return address. Inside was a simple message written in neat handwriting. "Thank you for being willing to do what so many of us weren't brave enough to do. Because of you, this is a better place to live. Happy holidays to you and your family." It wasn't signed, but I showed it to Jennifer and we both smiled. We'd never know who sent it, but it was a nice reminder that standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable or risky, matters. Mason and Sophie are older now, 9 and 7, and they still love drawing with chalk. They've expanded their artistic territory to include hopscotch grids, elaborate treasure maps, and occasionally mathematical equations that Mason has learned in school. Every time I see those colorful drawings on our driveway, I think about how close we came to letting someone bully us into stopping something so innocent and joyful. The HOA board continues to function smoothly under Patricia's leadership. They've become more transparent, more responsive to resident concerns, and more focused on genuine community needs rather than nitpicky enforcement. Property values have actually increased, probably because people feel more comfortable living in a neighborhood where the HOA is reasonable and helpful rather than adversarial and petty. We've never heard from Deborah again, and I don't expect to. I hope she's doing better in Tucson with her sister, that the therapy helped, and that she's found healthier ways to feel valuable and important. I don't wish her ill, despite everything that happened. She was a cautionary tale about what happens when someone gets a little bit of power and lets it go to their head, but she was also a human being who made mistakes and paid a heavy price for them. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, documentation matters. If I hadn't recorded that interaction, everything would have played out differently. Second, following proper procedures and channels matters. I didn't just post the video on social media or try to wage a public campaign against Deborah. I went through the official HOA process, which gave my complaint legitimacy and forced the board to take it seriously. Third, standing up for yourself matters, even when it's uncomfortable or scary. A lot of residents had been pushed around by Deborah for years, but they'd all just accepted it rather than fight back. By refusing to back down, I not only protected my own family, but also helped protect everyone else. Finally, I learned that most people are reasonable and fair when given the chance. The HOA board could have circled the wagons and defended Deborah out of loyalty or inertia. Instead, when presented with clear evidence of wrongdoing, they did the right thing. That's worth remembering in a world where it often feels like institutions are unresponsive or corrupt. These days, when new families move into the neighborhood, I always make a point to introduce myself and let them know about the HOA, how it works, and what's expected. I want them to understand that they have rights, that rules need to be applied fairly, and that they should never be afraid to question something that doesn't seem right. I also tell them that our board is reasonable and accessible, which is something I never take for granted after seeing what it was like before. Last week, I was elected to the HOA board as a regular member, not an officer position. I'd finally decided I had time to contribute more formally to the community, and I wanted to help ensure that the reforms we'd implemented stayed in place. My first meeting was Wednesday night, and I sat at that same table where Deborah used to sit, looking out at a room of residents who'd come to participate in their community's governance. We discussed normal things like landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. We approved one minor variance request for a resident who wanted to install solar panels. We reviewed the quarterly financial report, which was clear and transparent thanks to the new accounting systems. It was all remarkably boring and procedural, which is exactly what HOA governance should be. As I drove home after the meeting, I passed several houses with chalk drawings on their driveways. One had an elaborate dragon, another had what appeared to be the solar system, and a third had simply the words, "I love you, Mom," written in pink and purple. I smiled at each one, grateful that the children of Saguaro Ridge could express themselves freely without fear of threats or harassment. When I pulled into my own driveway, I saw that Mason and Sophie had been busy while I was at the meeting. They'd drawn a huge "Welcome Home, Daddy" message with flowers and smiley faces all around it. I sat in my truck for a moment, looking at their artwork, and felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what community was supposed to be about. Not rigid enforcement of arbitrary rules or power-hungry board members throwing their weight around. It was about neighbors looking out for each other, children feeling safe and happy in their own homes, and everyone working together to create a place where people actually wanted to live. I got out of the truck and headed inside, where Jennifer was waiting with decaf coffee and a smile. "How was your first meeting as a board member?" "Boring," I said happily. "Wonderfully, perfectly boring," she laughed. "That's exactly what you wanted." "That's exactly what everyone should want," I agreed. Drama and conflict make for interesting stories, but they make for terrible daily life. I'll take boring HOA meetings over power-hungry board members any day. Later that night, as I was tucking Sophie into bed, she asked me, "Daddy, do you remember that mean lady who yelled at us about our chalk drawings?" "I remember," I said carefully. "Is she ever going to come back?" "No, sweetie, she moved away. She lives in a different city now." Sophie thought about that for a moment. "I hope she's nicer to kids where she lives now, out of the mouths of babes. My 7-year-old daughter had more grace and forgiveness in her heart than I did." "I hope so too, Sophie. I hope so too." I kissed her goodnight and went to check on Mason, who was already asleep with a math book on his chest. I carefully removed the book, turned off his light, and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him breathe. These were the moments that mattered. Not HOA meetings or community drama or property values. Just a father watching his children sleep peacefully, safe in their home, able to be children without someone trying to control or restrict their simple joys. The story could have ended so differently. If I hadn't recorded that confrontation, Deborah might still be on the board, still collecting unauthorized fines, still making residents miserable with her arbitrary enforcement. If the board hadn't taken my complaint seriously, we might have ended up paying that ridiculous fine and learned to just keep our heads down. If other residents hadn't spoken up about their own experiences, the pattern of abuse might never have been fully recognized. But none of those things happened. Instead, the system worked the way it was supposed to. A wrong was identified, documented, and reported through proper channels. The people in authority reviewed the evidence and made a fair decision. Accountability was enforced. Reforms were implemented to prevent future problems. And the community became stronger and healthier as a result. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always fast. It certainly wasn't easy, but it worked, and that's what matters. As I write this, nearly 18 months after Deborah Patterson yelled at my children over sidewalk chalk, I can say with confidence that Saguaro Ridge is a better place to live than it was before. Not because we drove out someone who made mistakes, but because we collectively decided that our community should be governed by reason, fairness, and mutual respect, rather than by one person's need for control. The chalk drawings continue to appear on driveways throughout the neighborhood, bright splashes of childhood creativity that wash away with rain and get redrawn again in new forms. Mason wants to be an astronaut now, so his drawings tend to feature rockets and planets. Sophie has decided she's going to be an artist, so hers are becoming more elaborate and detailed with each passing week. Jennifer and I often sit on our front porch in the evenings, watching the kids play and chatting with neighbors who stop by to say hello. These simple moments of community connection are what an HOA should facilitate, not hinder. People should feel welcomed and supported in their neighborhood, not scrutinized and judged. I still have that original video saved on my phone, backed up in multiple places. I don't watch it anymore, but I keep it as a reminder of why documentation matters and why standing up to injustice, even small-scale suburban injustice, is important. Every once in a while, someone new to the neighborhood will ask about what happened with that board member who got kicked out. And I'll tell them the story, always emphasizing that the system worked when people were willing to use it properly. The best outcome of all this, though, is something I never expected. Other people in the neighborhood have become more engaged with HOA governance. Meeting attendance has tripled. More residents volunteer for committees. People actually read the meeting minutes now. When questions or concerns arise, people speak up instead of suffering in silence. We created a culture where it's okay to question authority and demand accountability, where following the rules applies to everyone, including the rule makers, and where the community comes together to solve problems rather than letting one or two people dictate everything. That's the real victory, much more important than any individual case or incident. As I finish writing this account, the sun is setting over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, I can hear children laughing and playing. On the street in front of our house, several families are out for evening walks. A neighbor waves as they pass by. This is what home should feel like. Safe, welcoming, full of life and joy and the ordinary beauty of people living their lives without unnecessary interference or conflict. It took standing up to a bully, documenting wrongdoing, following proper procedures, and having faith that the system could work to get here. But we made it, and I'm grateful every single day that we did. My kids will probably never fully understand what happened back then or why it mattered. To them, it was just a mean lady who yelled at them once and then went away. They don't know about the financial fraud, the board meetings, the investigations, or the reforms that followed. They just know that they're allowed to draw with chalk on their driveway, and occasionally there, Dad tells them how proud he is of them. That's exactly as it should be. Children should be able to be children. free from the petty power struggles and adult complications that sometimes threaten to overshadow the simple joys of life. Jennifer and I work hard to protect that innocence while also teaching them to stand up for themselves and others when something isn't right. The story of HOA Karen and the sidewalk chalk has become a bit of neighborhood legend now, the tale that gets told to newcomers as an example of how the community came together to fix a problem. It's been somewhat mythologized, with details getting exaggerated or changed in the retelling. But the core truth remains. Someone abused their authority, a family stood up to them, and the community supported doing the right thing. That's a story worth telling, and I'm proud to have been part of it. Not because I'm any kind of hero or exceptional person, but because I did what any parent should do when their children are threatened or mistreated. I protected them, I documented what happened, and I followed through with proper procedures until justice was done. If there's any lesson to take from all of this, it's simply this: stand up for what's right, document everything, follow proper procedures, and have faith that most people will do the right thing when given clear evidence and the opportunity. Systems aren't perfect, but they can work when people are willing to use them correctly and hold everyone accountable to the same standards. And maybe, just maybe, let kids draw with chalk on their driveways. It washes away, it hurts no one, and it brings joy to their lives. In a world full of legitimate problems and real concerns, that's not something worth fighting over. It's something worth celebrating.